The darkness that had once been Japan's greatest weapon was about to become their executioner. American radar screens glowed with deadly precision in the pre-dawn hours of November 13, 1942. Iron Bottom Sound stretched before the destroyer Amatsukaze like a graveyard waiting for fresh corpses. Commander Tamichihara felt the bridge deck vibrate beneath his boots as enemy shells screamed overhead. The white phosphorus star shells exploded above his ship. Harsh light bathed everything in ghostly illumination. 20 years of Imperial Navy doctrine crumbled in those terrifying moments. The enemy was firing from ranges that should have been impossible. Their shells arrived with mechanical timing that defied human capability. No searchlights betrayed American positions in the darkness. Helena's guns spoke from beyond visual range. 6-inch shells tore through Amatsukaze's superstructure. 43 Japanese sailors died before Hera's lookouts could even spot muzzle flashes. The battleship Hiei shuddered under concentrated bombardment from invisible attackers. What Japanese officers couldn't comprehend was the revolution occurring before their eyes. The SG surface search radar was transforming naval warfare. Japan's most precious tactical advantage was evaporating in 18 months of technological warfare. Mathematics would measure this defeat not in sunken ships, but in obsolete doctrine. The Imperial Navy's assumption about night combat supremacy was shattering against American electronics. 20 years of training became worthless against oscilloscopes and magnetrons. Japanese mastery of darkness traced back to the Russo-Japanese conflict of 1904–1905. Admiral Togo's torpedo boats had savaged Russian squadrons under cover of night at Tsushima. This triumph became sacred doctrine. Night fighting would let Japan defeat numerically superior foes. By 1942, this philosophy had evolved into the world's most advanced night combat system. Japanese crews trained endlessly in complete darkness. Lookouts underwent specialized programs to sharpen their night vision. Hours spent in darkened chambers. Vitamin A supplements to enhance optical capability. Distance estimation practice in zero-light conditions. The typical Japanese lookout could identify ship silhouettes at 7,000 meters on moonless nights. American counterparts managed half that distance. Technology seemed to validate Japanese superiority. America depended on primitive radar sets that most captains distrusted. Japanese optics led the world in precision. Binoculars manufactured by Nippon Kogaku offered exceptional magnification with superior light-gathering power. Type 93. Long-lance torpedoes could strike targets at 24,000 yards, far beyond any range where American ships could detect threats at night. Early Pacific battles confirmed every Japanese assumption. Savo Island on August 9, 1942, saw Japanese cruisers annihilate Allied forces in 33 minutes of night combat. 4 heavy cruisers sunk without Japanese losses. Tassafaronga on November 30, 1942, would see a single destroyer squadron savage superior American cruiser forces. 4 ships torpedoed in minutes. Unknown to Imperial commanders, revolution was brewing in American laboratories and shipyards. The SG surface search radar represented quantum advancement from failed systems at Savo Island. MIT Radiation Laboratory and Naval Research Laboratory guidance produced this breakthrough. 10-centimeter wavelength operation with 50 kilowatt power output. Destroyer detection at 15 nautical miles with firing accuracy at 10 miles. MIT's Radiation Laboratory had mushroomed from November 1940 establishment to nearly 4,000 employees by 1943. The British Tizard mission's cavity magnetron delivery in September 1940 provided the foundation. Historian James Finney Baxter III called it the most valuable cargo ever brought to American shores. This technology enabled production of approximately 1,000 SG radar sets during the conflict. USS Fletcher, DD-445, commissioned June 30, 1942, as the first Fletcher-class destroyer, carried this revolutionary system as standard equipment. By November 1942, Fletcher herself operated in the Solomon Islands as the only Fletcher-class destroyer present at Guadalcanal's naval battle. The plan position indicator scope provided God's eye battlefield perspective. All contacts appeared on circular screens updating every 2 seconds. Operators could distinguish ship types by radar returns. Torpedo wake tracking became possible. Even periscope depth submarines showed on screens. The system functioned equally well in daylight or darkness. Clear weather or storms made no difference. Smoke and fog couldn't blind these electronic eyes. SG radar integrated with Mark 37 gun directors linked to analog computers, calculating firing solutions in seconds. Automatic adjustment for target speed, course, wind, and ship motion. 5-inch 38 caliber guns fired 15 to 20 rounds per minute with radar-directed precision. November 12-13, 1942 would begin shattering Japanese night combat assumptions. Guadalcanal's naval battle started when Rear Admiral Daniel Callahan's task force intercepted Vice Admiral Hiroaki Abe's bombardment group approaching Henderson Field. USS Fletcher represented the new destroyer class while several ships carried SG radar, including Helena. At 01:24 hours, Helena's SG radar detected Japanese ships at 27,000 yards, far beyond visual range capability. 20 minutes followed with American radar operators tracking the approaching enemy force. Japanese lookouts strained futilely into empty darkness. Battle descended into chaos as American radar-directed fire disrupted Japanese formations before they could employ superior night fighting tactics. Destroyer Akatsuki, attempting her specialized torpedo attack, was caught in crossfire from multiple radar-guided American ships. She exploded and vanished in minutes. Commander Hara on Amatsukaze experienced this new reality directly. His ship successfully torpedoed USS Barton, breaking her in half. USS Juno left crippled by Japanese weapons. But when Hara illuminated San Francisco with searchlights to improve gunnery, Helena's radar-directed guns immediately found Amatsukaze in darkness. Severe damage and heavy casualties resulted from this exposure. Battleship Hiei became the focus of American radar-directed fire. Darkness and rain squalls that should have provided concealment meant nothing. She absorbed 85 shell hits from enemies firing beyond Japanese visual capability. Her bridge wrecked, steering destroyed, superstructure ablaze. Scuttling the next day made her the first Japanese battleship lost in the war. Disparity between Japanese and American night fighting grew increasingly apparent through late 1942 and early 1943. American SG radar operated at 3 gigahertz with 50 kilowatts peak power. Destroyer detection at 15+ nautical miles with accuracy of plus or minus 40 yards in range. Plus or minus half-degree bearing accuracy. Weight of 1,000 pounds with 95% operational availability made widespread deployment practical. Japanese Type 22 radar operated at 150 megahertz with only 2 kilowatts peak power. Destroyer detection at 10 nautical miles under optimal conditions only. Accuracy of plus or minus 300 yards in range. Plus or minus 5 degrees in bearing accuracy. Weight of 2,200 pounds with only 40% operational availability made it cumbersome and unreliable. Of the first 60 Type 22 sets built, only about 6 actually functioned. Total Japanese radar production during the war reached only 300 units, less than one-third of American SG production alone. This technological gap reflected deeper organizational failures. Japan had developed cavity magnetrons by 1937. Dr. Hidetsugu Yagi had invented the directional antenna bearing his name in 1926. Yet military leadership excluded Yagi from radar development. When Japanese forces captured British radar equipment with Yagi antennas, they remained unaware the design originated with a Japanese inventor. Army-Navy rivalry prevented coordination. Both services developed separate, incompatible systems. The Battle of Vella La Vella on October 6–7, 1943 saw USS Selfridge detect and track long-lance torpedoes using radar. Evasion of weapons that had been invariably lethal in earlier battles became possible. Fletcher-class destroyer radar advantage extended beyond simple detection to complete tactical superiority. The Tokyo Express high-speed destroyer runs to resupply Guadalcanal had depended entirely on Japanese night-fighting superiority. These missions, conducted by the Imperial Navy's finest destroyer captains, began suffering increasing losses to radar-equipped American ships. Captain Raizo Tanaka commanded the 2nd Destroyer Squadron and led many Tokyo Express runs. His 1956 U.S. Naval Institute Proceedings article, Japan's Losing Struggle for Guadalcanal, addressed the growing American radar advantage. Though Tanaka's tactical brilliance achieved success at Tassafaronga, he recognized darkness no longer protected against American technology. By early 1943, American destroyers intercepted Tokyo Express runs in complete darkness. Rain squall conditions meant nothing to radar operators. They fired first, fired accurately, pursued Japanese forces even when fleeing at full speed into night. November 25, 1943, demonstrated complete reversal of tactical advantage. 5 destroyers under Captain Arleigh Burke intercepted 5 Japanese destroyers off Cape St. George. Running battle fought entirely by radar resulted in Burke's squadron sinking 3 Japanese destroyers. Onami, Makanami, and Yugiri went down without inflicting significant damage. Japanese forces never achieved visual contact with their attackers. This would be the last surface engagement in the Solomon Islands. Major surface combat in the area had ended. By mid-1943, Japanese naval commanders desperately tried adapting to new reality. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's death in April 1943 removed the leader who might have best understood American technological superiority implications. Japanese attempts to counter American radar proved futile. Rudimentary radar countermeasures deployment included aluminum strips called gimenshi, or deception paper. These proved ineffective against sophisticated SG radar. Japanese radar development, hampered by inter-service rivalry and resource constraints, remained years behind American technology. Commander Tamichi Hara survived the war as the only IJN destroyer captain from Pearl Harbor to do so. His memoir, Japanese Destroyer Captain, described growing realization among Japanese officers that night fighting expertise had become obsolete. Though his memoir contains factual errors, his assessment of American technological superiority proved accurate. Empress Augusta Bay on November 2, 1943, provided the clearest demonstration of radar's naval combat transformation. Rear Admiral Aaron Merrill's Task Force 39 included several Fletcher-class destroyers with latest SG radar modifications. They intercepted superior Japanese forces under Rear Admiral Sentaro Omori. At 0227 hours, radar contact at 35,900 yards gave Americans complete tactical advantage. For the next hour, American ships tracked approaching enemy with perfect clarity, maneuvering for optimal firing positions while remaining invisible to Japanese lookouts. American destroyers demonstrated capabilities that seemed supernatural to Japanese observers. Ships engaged at ranges exceeding 14,000 yards in total darkness. First salvo hits became routine. Radar tracking of torpedo wakes enabled evasion, followed by counterattacks against launching destroyers, all without visual contact. Battle outcome shocked Japanese high command. Despite superior numbers and firepower, Omori's force was routed. Light cruiser Sendai and destroyer Hatsukaze lost while inflicting minimal damage. Samuel Eliot Morrison noted this battle marked the end of Japan's night engagement advantage. Psychological impact on Japanese naval personnel transcended tactical defeat. Men who had spent years perfecting night fighting skills watched helplessly as technology rendered expertise worthless. Morale erosion was documented in Japanese operational reports. Vaunted long-lance torpedoes launched at radar-guided estimates increasingly found empty water. Elite destroyer crews that considered themselves masters of night combat found themselves helpless against invisible enemies. Fletcher-class production represented American industrial might at its zenith. Between 1942 and 1944, American shipyards produced exactly 175 Fletcher-class destroyers, more destroyers than Japan built of all types during the entire war. Each ship carried radar systems more sophisticated than anything in the Japanese fleet. SG radar sets manufactured by Western Electric, Westinghouse, and General Electric at rates that defied Japanese comprehension. Magnetron tubes at radar's heart impossible for Japan to manufacture reliably were mass-produced in American factories. By war's end, the United States had produced over 100,000 radar sets of all types. This disparity extended beyond mere production numbers. American radar improved continuously throughout the war. SG radar evolved through multiple versions, with each iteration increasing range, accuracy, and discrimination. By 1944, American destroyers carried radar systems detecting surface submarines at 18 miles. Periscope tracking at 3 miles became routine. Meanwhile, Japanese radar development stagnated. Naval Electrical Research Department had only 300 staff by August 1943. MIT Radiation Laboratory employed 4,000 people. Critical components required materials Japan couldn't obtain. Most crucially, Japan lacked the vast electronics industry supporting American radar development. As radar negated traditional night-fighting tactics, the Imperial Navy desperately sought new doctrines. Orders from Combined Fleet Headquarters began acknowledging American radar superiority. Emphasis on radical maneuvering and acceptance of higher casualties represented complete capitulation to American technological superiority. The Imperial Navy that once sought night battles now actively avoided them. When forced to fight, they employed tactics, accepting severe losses for possible torpedo launch positions. Training programs struggled to adapt. Torpedo School at Yokosuka attempted developing blind launch techniques. Firing torpedo spreads at calculated positions without visual contact produced minimal success rates. Naval War College developed new night-fighting doctrines based on accepting catastrophic casualties. Even Japan's submarine force, initially less affected by American radar superiority, soon encountered the technology's reach. Fleet submarines attempting battery recharging on surface at night discovered darkness no longer provided safety. SG radar could detect surface submarines at ranges exceeding 15 miles, far beyond visual range even in daylight. Japanese submarines dependent on surface running for speed and battery charging found operational effectiveness crippled. Transit speeds dropped from 15 knots, surfaced, to 3 knots, submerged. Battery life limited underwater endurance to hours rather than days. American destroyer escorts equipped with radar hunted Japanese submarines with deadly efficiency. USS England sank 6 Japanese submarines in 12 days during May 1944. All detected initially by radar, Japanese submarine losses reached catastrophic levels by late 1944. Japanese naval officers drew parallels between radar disadvantage and B-29 bombing campaigns. American bombers struck from altitudes beyond Japanese interceptor reach, just as destroyers struck from beyond visual range. Technology created sanctuary from which Americans could attack without risk. The psychological parallel was exact. Fighter pilots watching B-29s cruise overhead beyond their ceiling experienced identical helplessness as destroyer crews being shelled by invisible enemies. Traditional warrior skills meant nothing. Courage, training, spirit proved worthless against technological superiority, preventing engagement entirely. Leyte Gulf in October 1944 provided final devastating confirmation of radar's naval warfare transformation. The largest naval battle in history became technological mismatch demonstrating American superiority. During Samar on October 25, 1944, destroyer USS Johnston under Commander Ernest Evans engaged Japanese battleships using radar-directed fire in rain squalls and smoke. Despite being vastly outgunned, American destroyer escorts and destroyers used radar coordinating attacks through smoke screens, blinding Japanese optical rangefinders. Japanese ships used color-coded dyes in their shells. Yamato used white, Nagato brilliant pink, Haruna greenish-yellow, Kongo blood red. Optical spotters could identify fall of shot through this practice necessitated by lack of fire control radar. This contrasted starkly with American radar-controlled automatic firing systems. In Surigao Strait, American destroyers launched coordinated torpedo attacks from beyond visual range, guided entirely by radar. Battleship Fuso was torpedoed and sunk by destroyers her crew never saw. Japanese forces entered the strait piecemeal and were destroyed by radar-directed fire from ships they couldn't locate. Vela Gulf, on August 6–7, 1943, demonstrated complete American mastery of radar-directed combat. Commander Frederick Moosbrugger's 6 destroyers detected 4 Japanese destroyers carrying 950 troops at 11:33 p.m. Using radar, the American force closed to optimal torpedo range undetected. Results were devastating. 3 Japanese destroyers, Hagikaze, Arashi, and Kawakaze, sunk with 1,210 Japanese sailors and soldiers killed. American casualties, 0. Not a single hit scored on U.S. ships. Captain Tamichi Hara, commanding sole Japanese survivor Shigure, later called it a perfect American victory. Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz termed the battle a little classic of naval warfare, demonstrating how completely radar had reversed night combat advantage. November 25, 1943 saw Captain Arleigh Burke's destroyer Squadron 23 achieve another perfect radar victory at Cape St. George. Burke's Little Beavers detected 5 Japanese destroyers at 141, tracked them undetected and launched devastating attacks. 3 Japanese destroyers, Onami, Makanami, and Yugiri, sunk with 647 Japanese killed. American losses, 0 casualties, 0 damage. Burke's after-action report was clinical. Entire engagement conducted by radar plot. Visual contact with enemy never achieved nor required. This battle convinced Japanese naval leadership that night surface combat was no longer viable against radar-equipped American forces. Orders from Combined Fleet essentially abandoned night destroyer actions, acknowledging that night combat advantage now belonged entirely to the enemy. This marked the last surface engagement of the Solomon Islands campaign, effectively ending Japanese attempts to use destroyer forces in night combat. American production figures revealed the true technological gulf. United States production 175 Fletcher-class destroyers between 1942 and 1944. Approximately 1,000 SG radar sets manufactured. 100,000 plus radar sets of all types. 250,000 cavity magnetrons produced. 2.5 million radio tubes monthly by 1944. 50,000 trained radar technicians. $1.5 billion invested in radar development in 1940s currency. Japanese production 32 destroyers of all types between 1942 and 1944. Approximately 300 radar sets, total all types. 50,000 radio tubes monthly at peak. 500 partially trained radar technicians. Minimal investment in radar development. The disparity exceeded 50-1 in crucial areas. America had more radar sets on destroyers alone than Japan produced for all purposes. Every Fletcher-class destroyer represented industrial capacity Japan wouldn't achieve for decades. Japanese naval training programs never successfully adapted to the radar age. Infrastructure of 20 years, including night vision training, lookout schools, and optical ranging systems became obsolete overnight, but couldn't be replaced. Few Japanese radar sets available were primitive and unreliable. Type 22 surface search radar, when it worked, had less than half American SG radar capability. More critically, it lacked discrimination to separate targets or direct accurate gunfire. It used only a scope display showing range as spike on line. rather than SG's revolutionary PPI showing all contacts on map-like display. Training on these inferior sets proved counterproductive. Officers learned to distrust radar after multiple failures, returned to visual methods despite their inadequacy. Iron-bottom sound waters around Guadalcanal, dubbed for ships resting on seafloor, became the laboratory where radar warfare was perfected. Evolution was documented in Japanese operational losses during night engagements. August-September 1942, Japanese losses nearly equal to American. October-November 1942, Japanese losses double American. December 1942 to January 1943, Japanese losses triple American. February 1943, onward Japanese losses catastrophic, American minimal. By Guadalcanal campaign's end, Japan had lost 40 destroyers in 16 months according to U.S. Naval Institute sources. Night fighting advantage that had been cornerstone of Japanese naval strategy was completely reversed. For the Imperial Japanese Navy rooted in samurai tradition and personal combat excellence, the radar revolution represented cultural catastrophe. The premise that technology could replace warrior skill contradicted fundamental Japanese military philosophy. Young Japanese officers raised on tales of samurai valor and personal combat struggled to comprehend warfare where enemies were invisible and unreachable. Radar Gap challenged Japanese racial theories portraying Americans as spiritually weak, dependent on technology because they lacked warrior courage. Japanese attempts to counter American radar revealed both ingenuity and futility. Window chaff deployment proved ineffective against sophisticated American radars. Electronic warfare attempts failed completely. Japan lacked electronics industry to produce jamming equipment in useful quantities. Japanese attempted tactical solutions including special paints supposed to reduce radar reflection. Tests proved these marginally effective at best. By mid-1944, Naval Technical Department had essentially given up matching American radar technology. Adoption of kamikaze tactics in October 1944 represented Japan's response to comprehensive defeat. Not specifically to radar disadvantage, Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi organized First Official Kamikaze Unit October 19, 1944, at Mabalacat Airfield. His stated reason was that with only 40 operational aircraft and poorly trained pilots, conventional attacks were futile. Documented factors behind kamikaze decision included catastrophic pilot losses, training deficiencies, loss of air superiority, resource shortages. Radar disadvantage was never cited in contemporary documents as factor in adopting suicide tactics. First organized kamikaze attacks on October 25, 1944 coincidentally occurred same day as Battle of Samar, but were driven by desperation over pilot quality and aircraft availability, not radar concerns. Statistics from Pacific War destroyer engagements starkly illustrated radar's impact. Pre-radar era, December 1941 to October 1942. Japanese destroyer losses in night combat 8. American destroyer losses in night combat 11. Exchange ratio 1.4 to 1 favoring Japan. Early radar era, November 1942 to June 1943. Japanese destroyer losses in night combat 19. American destroyer losses in night combat 7. Exchange ratio 2.7 to 1 favoring America. Mature radar era, July 1943 to August 1945. Japanese destroyer losses in night combat 47. American destroyer losses in night combat 4. Exchange ratio 11.8 to 1 favoring America. Technical superiority of American radar systems exceeded Japanese capabilities by orders of magnitude. SG radar American specifications. Frequency 3 gigahertz 10 centimeter wavelength. Power output 50 kilowatts. Range against destroyer 15 plus nautical miles. Range accuracy plus or minus 40 yards. Bearing accuracy plus or minus half degree. Display plan position indicator PPI. Production approximately 1,000 units. Type 22 radar Japanese specifications. Frequency 150 MHz, 2-meter wavelength. Power output 2 kilowatts. Range against destroyer 10 nautical miles optimal. Range accuracy plus or minus 300 yards. Bearing accuracy plus or minus 5 degrees. Display A-scope only. Production approximately 300 units total. These specifications revealed technological generations of difference. American radar operated at frequencies providing better resolution. Used magnetron tubes Japan couldn't manufacture reliably. Integrated with fire control systems Japan hadn't developed. Captured Japanese equipment and post-war interrogations revealed depth of technological gap. Japanese forces had captured examples of British cavity magnetrons early in war, but couldn't reproduce them. When they captured radar sets with Yagi antennas, they didn't realize these were named after Japanese inventor Hidetsugu Yagi, whom their own military had ignored. United States Strategic Bombing Survey's post-war interviews with Japanese naval officers found universal agreement that radar had transformed naval warfare beyond Japanese ability to adapt. Officers testified that by 1943 they understood the radar gap, but suppressed this knowledge to maintain morale. Cape Saint. George, on November 25, 1943, served as epitaph for Japanese night fighting superiority. Captain Arleigh Burke's destroyer Squadron 23 achieved perfect victory through radar, sinking 3 Japanese destroyers without loss. This battle convinced Japanese naval leadership that night surface combat was no longer viable. Orders from Combined Fleet essentially abandoned night destroyer actions, acknowledging that night combat advantage now belonged entirely to the enemy. MIT Radiation Laboratory deserves special recognition for revolutionizing naval warfare. Established November 1940 under Dr. Lee Dubridge, it grew to nearly 4,000 employees, designing half of all radar systems deployed by U.S. forces. The lab's work went far beyond SG radar, developing over 100 different microwave systems worth $1.5 billion in production. Foundation was British cavity magnetron, delivered in Tizard mission of September 1940. This single device, producing 1 kilowatt at 10 centimeter wavelength, was 100 times more powerful than existing technology. Americans mass-produced what British had invented, and Japanese couldn't replicate. 9 radiation laboratory staff members would later win Nobel Prizes. But their wartime contribution was enabling electronic revolution, transforming naval combat from visual engagement to radar-directed warfare. Radar revolution forced fundamental changes in naval doctrine persisting today. Every modern navy acknowledges electronic detection superseded visual observation as primary means of naval combat. United States Naval War College study of 1947 concluded that future naval combat will be determined by electronic capabilities rather than seamanship. Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force, established in 1950s, built founding principles on lessons learned from radar war. Electronic warfare capability is foundation of naval power. All other considerations are secondary to sensor superiority. Japanese technical officers who understood radar's implications early were ignored by operational commanders wedded to traditional doctrine. Few officers trained in electronics became prophets without honor, predicting defeat while being dismissed by leadership, refusing to acknowledge technological reality. This disconnect between technical understanding and operational doctrine proved fatal. While American forces integrated radar into every aspect of naval operations, Japanese commanders continued planning visual-ranged night attacks, even as their ships were destroyed from beyond sight. Final measure of radar's impact came from comparative loss statistics. Reversal was complete. Radar transformed night combat from Japanese advantage to American dominance. Weapon that Japan had perfected over decades was turned against them with technology they couldn't match. By war's end, of 70 modern destroyers Japan possessed at Pearl Harbor, only about a dozen remained operational. Imperial Japanese Navy that entered war as masters of night combat ended it unable to venture out after dark. Commander Tamichi Hara, the only Japanese destroyer captain from Pearl Harbor to survive entire war, published his memoir, Japanese Destroyer Captain, in 1961. While it contains some factual errors, his assessment of radar war stands as most comprehensive first-hand account from Japanese perspective. Hara participated in 16 major naval battles witnessing complete transformation of naval warfare. His ship Amatsukaze survived November 13, 1942 battle despite severe damage from Helena's radar-directed guns. He later commanded Yugiri and finally destroyer Shigure, surviving battles where most fellow captains perished. In his memoir, Hara criticized Japanese leadership for failing to appreciate speed with which enemy could develop new weapons, never understanding implications of technological change. He survived to see Imperial Navy's night-fighting supremacy completely reversed by American radar. Admiral Raizo Tanaka, who commanded Tokyo Express runs, published his own assessment in 1956. Japan's losing struggle for Guadalcanal in U.S. Naval Institute proceedings. He acknowledged American radar had fundamentally changed naval warfare, making traditional Japanese night-fighting tactics obsolete. Radar war forced philosophical reckoning within Japanese military culture. Fundamental premise of Bushido that spiritual superiority could overcome material disadvantage was shattered by oscilloscopes and magnetrons. Post-war Japanese military philosophy had to reconcile traditional warrior culture with technological warfare. Lesson was absolute. In modern war, technology is not supplementary, but supreme. Those who see first win, those who see farthest dominate. Final accounting of radar war in Pacific provides stark quantification of technological revolution. Japanese destroyer losses primarily to surface combat, 1942, November-December 4 destroyers, 1943, 31 destroyers, 1944, 28 destroyers, 1945 to August 14 destroyers, American destroyer losses in night surface combat, 1942, November-December 3 destroyers, 1943, 4 destroyers, 1944, 1 destroyer, 1945, 0 destroyers. Technology gap by 1944, American destroyers with effective radar, 175, Japanese destroyers with effective radar, 0. American radar range advantage, 200 to 300%. Japanese night vision advantage negated completely. These numbers tell story of revolution transforming naval warfare in less than 2 years. Imperial Japanese Navy, which had spent decades perfecting night combat, was defeated by technology that didn't exist when their training began. Fletcher-class destroyers with SG radar sets achieved something unprecedented in military history. Complete negation of enemy's primary tactical advantage through technological superiority. Japanese night fighting expertise, carefully cultivated since 1904, was rendered worthless by magnetrons and oscilloscopes mass-produced in American factories. Commander Tamichi Hara's survival through 16 major battles gave him unique perspective on this transformation, from commanding Amatsukaze at Guadalcanal, where he first encountered American radar, to commanding Shigure when it was sole survivor at Vela Gulf. He witnessed complete reversal of naval warfare. Imperial Japanese Navy had entered war confident that superior night-fighting skills would offset American material advantages. By war's end, radar had proven technological superiority could completely negate human skill, training, and tradition. Fletcher-class destroyers with SG radar sets had not just won the destroyer war. They had fundamentally transformed naval warfare from art to science, from human skill to electronic detection, from warrior tradition to technological superiority. Japanese officers who survived understood fundamental truth. Age of visual naval combat ended in waters around Guadalcanal, replaced forever by electronic warfare caring nothing for courage, tradition, or warrior spirit. They had been masters of night combat, perfecting skills across decades of training. But in just 18 months, American radar turned mastery into obsolescence, expertise into irrelevance, night fighting advantage into fatal liability. Darkness that had been their greatest ally became their tomb. Americans who wielded radar became undisputed masters of night. Revolution was complete, irreversible, and devastating. In the end, those who could see won. Those who remained blind to technological change were condemned to defeat in darkness they once ruled.